On November 2, 1986, Arkansas investigators opened a metal footlocker in an abandoned hunting cabin and recoiled. Inside were 127 Polaroids of different women hiking alone in the Ozarks, each shot with a telephoto lens from a hidden vantage point. Beneath them lay 9 detailed hunting logs. Authorities identified only 12 women, 9 already reported missing. Before we dive into this story, I need you to understand something. What you're about to hear isn't fiction, and it isn't exaggerated for effect. This is a documented case that changed how we think about safety in America's wilderness areas, and it's a story that needs to be told so we can learn from the failures that allowed it to continue for over 2 decades. If you believe these stories matter, then click the like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue researching and sharing these important true crime investigations. Now let's continue with the story. In March of 1986, 26-year-old Rebecca Hartley walked out of the Ozark wilderness after being missing for 11 days. When Newton County deputies found her stumbling along Highway 7 near Jasper, Arkansas, she was dehydrated, hypothermic, and her hiking boots were worn through to her bloodied feet. The deputies wrapped her in emergency blankets and transported her to North Arkansas Regional Medical Center in Harrison, where doctors treated her for exposure, malnutrition, and multiple lacerations across her arms and legs. Her initial statement to the responding officers was straightforward and unremarkable. She had been hiking the Ozark Highlands Trail, attempting a solo trek from Lake Fort Smith to the Buffalo National River. On the 4th day of her journey, she had left the marked trail to photograph a rock formation she'd spotted from a ridge, and in her excitement, lost her orientation. For 11 days, she wandered through the dense forest, surviving on creek water and the few energy bars remaining in her pack. The deputies filed their report. The local newspaper ran a brief story about the rescued hiker, and the case was effectively closed. Rebecca's parents drove down from Indianapolis to collect their daughter, relieved to have her back alive. The hospital discharged her after 3 days of observation and treatment. Everyone involved considered it a fortunate ending to what could have been a tragic accident. But 3 days after her discharge, while staying at a motel in Harrison before the drive back to Indiana, Rebecca called Detective Frank Pruitt, the officer who had taken her initial statement. Her voice was quiet, almost apologetic, when she asked if their conversation could be kept off the official record. Detective Pruitt, a 23-year veteran of the Newton County Sheriff's Department, agreed to meet her privately at a diner outside of town. What Rebecca revealed during that meeting would remain buried in Detective Pruitt's personal notes for 8 months. She described how her story about getting lost was a lie, crafted in the hospital bed, because she was terrified of what might happen if she told the truth. The real story began on the 3rd day of her hike, when she had encountered 2 men near Fairview Creek, brothers who had seemed friendly at first, offering advice about the trail ahead and pointing out a shortcut to what they called a spectacular overlook that most hikers never found. Rebecca told Detective Pruitt that something in their eyes had warned her, some instinct that made her decline their offer and continue on the marked trail instead. She had hiked for another hour when she realized the brothers were following her, staying just far enough back to remain barely visible through the trees. When she stopped, they stopped. When she increased her pace, they matched it. As the afternoon shadows lengthened across the forest floor, Rebecca made a decision that would save her life. She left the trail and ran. For 11 days, Rebecca Hartley had played a game of survival against 2 men who tracked her through the Ozark wilderness with disturbing patience. She described to Detective Pruitt how they never rushed, never called out to her, never seemed frustrated when she evaded them. They moved through the forest like men who had done this before, who understood that panic was their ally, and time was meaningless in the dense woods where no one could hear screaming. She had hidden in limestone caves, waded through creeks to mask her scent, doubled back on her own trail. Twice she had lain motionless in thick underbrush while they passed within yards of her position, close enough that she could hear their breathing, smell the tobacco smoke on their clothes. On the 7th day, she had watched from a concealed position as they examined her abandoned backpack, which she had deliberately left behind to lighten her load. One of them had opened her journal and read her entries aloud to his brother, laughing at her descriptions of the peaceful solitude she had hoped to find in the mountains. Detective Pruitt had listened to her account with growing unease, taking notes in a small notebook he kept separate from official files. When he asked why she had lied in her initial statement, Rebecca's answer chilled him. During one encounter, when the brothers had come terrifyingly close to discovering her hiding spot beneath a fallen oak, she had heard them talking. The older one had said something that made her realize reporting the truth might be more dangerous than staying silent. He had mentioned knowing people in the sheriff's office, people who would make sure no one believed a confused hiker's wild story about being hunted. Now, 8 months later, on that cold November morning in 1986, Detective Pruitt stood in an abandoned hunting cabin on property owned by two brothers named Vernon and Dale Calloway, staring at evidence that transformed Rebecca's terrifying story from dismissed paranoia into documented fact. The metal footlocker contained proof that she had been one of the fortunate ones. When the Arkansas State Police began their investigation into the Calloway brothers following the discovery, they started with standard background checks. What they found made no sense. According to birth records carefully preserved at the Newton County Courthouse, no one named Vernon or Dale Calloway had ever been born in Arkansas. The county clerk, a meticulous woman named Judith Plemons, who had maintained those records for 32 years, confirmed that the surname Calloway appeared nowhere in the birth registries between 1920 and 1960. The property deed from 1956, however, told a different story. The 480 acres of remote woodland bordering the Buffalo National River had been legally transferred to Vernon and Dale Hutchins, listed as the sons of Raymond Hutchins, a bootlegger whose illegal still operation had been raided multiple times by federal agents during the 1940s. Raymond had died in 1956 when one of his stills exploded, and the property had passed to his sons, according to a handwritten will that barely met legal requirements. Somewhere between 1956 and 1960, the brothers had changed their surname. In rural Arkansas during that era, such changes often happened informally, without court proceedings or legal documentation. A man could simply start using a different name, particularly his mother's maiden name, and within a few years, it would appear on tax records, utility bills, and informal transactions. The Hutchins brothers had become the Calloway brothers through this gradual, unrecorded process. But investigators needed to understand why. Men didn't abandon their father's name without reason, particularly not in the close-knit communities of the Ozark Mountains, where family lineage carried significant weight. The question haunted the investigation team. What were Vernon and Dale Hutchins trying to escape by becoming Vernon and Dale Calloway? The answer would emerge from archives no one had thought to search, revealing a legacy of violence that stretched back further than anyone had imagined. During the initial search of the Calloway cabin, a young state trooper named Michael Vance noticed something unusual mounted on the back wall, partially obscured by a tattered wool blanket. When he pulled the blanket aside, he found himself staring at a large topographical map of the Ozark region, approximately 4 feet wide and 3 feet tall, marked with colored pins and meticulous handwritten annotations. The red pins caught his attention first. 23 of them, clustered along the Ozark Highlands Trail, the Buffalo River Trail, and several unofficial hiking routes that wound through the most remote sections of Newton and Madison counties. Each red pin had a date written beside it in small, precise handwriting. The earliest date was April of 1968. The most recent was September of 1986, just 2 months before the cabin's discovery. Vance called over the lead investigator, and together they began photographing the map in sections, documenting every mark and notation. But it was when they examined the blue pins that the scope of what they were looking at became truly horrifying. 43 blue pins scattered across 3 states, extending into southern Missouri and eastern Oklahoma. Each blue pin also had a date, and the earliest of these predated the red pins by 5 years, going back to 1963. The investigation team spent the next 72 hours cross-referencing those blue pin locations with missing persons databases across Arkansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma. The results justified their worst fears. 21 of the 43 blue pin locations corresponded directly to unsolved disappearances of women in remote recreational areas. The dates on the map matched, sometimes within days, the last confirmed sightings of the missing women. What made the map even more disturbing was its sophistication. Topographical contour lines had been traced over in pencil, highlighting elevation changes, water sources, and natural choke points where trails narrowed between rock formations or dense forest. Certain areas were circled in red ink with notes like "good visibility" or "no road access for 3 miles," or simply "isolated." The map revealed a level of planning that transformed the brothers from opportunistic criminals into something far more calculated. Arkansas State Police reopened cold case files dating back to the earliest pins on the map. Among them was the disappearance of Margaret Finley, a 22-year-old schoolteacher from Springfield, Missouri, who had vanished while hiking near Buffalo Point in May of 1968. The original investigation had concluded she had likely fallen from a bluff into the Buffalo River during high water, though her body was never recovered. A blue pin marked that exact location, with the date May 18, 1968, written beside it. Margaret had last been seen on May 17th. In Oklahoma, a blue pin corresponded to the disappearance of 2 sisters, Anne and Dorothy Keller, who had gone missing while camping in the Ouachita National Forest in July of 1971. The sisters, ages 19 and 23, had been experienced hikers from Tulsa. Search teams had combed the area for weeks, finding only their abandoned tent and sleeping bags. The case had remained open, inactive for 15 years. Investigators realized they were no longer looking at a series of isolated incidents confined to Arkansas. The map suggested the Calloway brothers had been operating across state lines for more than 2 decades, selecting remote locations where disappearances would be attributed to accidents or misadventure. The geographic spread indicated they had studied hiking patterns, seasonal traffic, and law enforcement jurisdictions with disturbing thoroughness. But the map also raised a troubling question that would haunt the investigation. The blue pins started in 1963, when Vernon would have been 18 and Dale only 16, according to the birth records they had finally located under the Hutchins name. How had teenage boys developed such sophisticated hunting strategies? the answer would point to something even darker in their family history. Among the archived case files that investigators reviewed was a 1979 incident report that had been filed and forgotten. The report described an encounter that, had anyone taken it seriously, might have stopped the Calloway brothers 7 years earlier and saved multiple lives. Linda Shepard had been 24 years old when she decided to hike a portion of the Ozark Highlands Trail during the 3rd week of October, 1979. An experienced outdoorswoman from Little Rock, she had completed several multi-day hikes across Arkansas and felt confident tackling the trail alone during the off-season, when crowds thinned and the autumn colors peaked. On her 2nd day, she encountered 2 men near Marinoni Scenic Area. They had seemed pleasant enough initially, asking about her route and offering suggestions about campsites ahead. But something in the way they looked at her, a quality she couldn't quite articulate, made her uneasy. She thanked them politely and continued hiking, pushing her pace slightly faster than comfortable. An hour later, she realized they were following her, not on the trail itself, but parallel to it, moving through the forest just beyond clear sight. She would catch glimpses of them through the trees, pacing her movements with unsettling precision. When she stopped to rest, she could hear them stop as well, the forest falling into an unnatural silence that made her skin crawl. Linda abandoned her planned campsite and kept walking as the afternoon faded into evening. The men continued their parallel tracking, never closing the distance, but never falling behind. As darkness approached, she made a decision born of pure instinct. She left the marked trail entirely and pushed into the densest section of forest she could find, moving as quietly as possible through the underbrush. For 6 hours, she hid in a small cave formed by an overhanging limestone shelf, listening to the sounds of footsteps and low voices searching the area around her position. The men moved methodically, covering ground in a grid pattern that suggested they had done this before. They spoke to each other in calm tones, discussing which direction she might have gone, where she might try to hide, how long they should continue the search before returning in the morning. When dawn finally came, and the voices had been silent for over an hour, Linda emerged from her hiding spot and made her way back to the trail. She hiked the remaining 8 miles to the nearest trailhead without stopping, drove directly to the Madison County Sheriff's Office, and filed a formal report. Deputy Thomas Garrett took her statement, but his skepticism was evident in both his questions and his final notation on the report. Linda had been unable to provide last names for the men, could not say definitively that they had intended her harm, and admitted she had consumed some whiskey from her flask during the ordeal to calm her nerves. Deputy Garrett concluded his report with a dismissive observation. Witness appeared intoxicated, story inconsistent with local knowledge of area. Linda tried to insist that something had been fundamentally wrong about the encounter, that the men had been hunting her with practiced efficiency. Deputy Garrett suggested she had misinterpreted the intentions of helpful local residents, that her fear had been amplified by darkness and isolation. The report was filed in the general incident log and never investigated further. Linda left Arkansas 3 months later, relocating to Eugene, Oregon, where she had family. She told her sister that she couldn't shake the feeling that the men would come looking for her, that they somehow knew who she was and where she lived. In November of 1986, Arkansas State Police located Linda in Oregon and showed her photographs of Vernon and Dale Calloway. Her identification was immediate and certain. Those were the men who had hunted her through the Ozark forest 7 years earlier. The hunting cabin had yielded disturbing evidence from the moment investigators entered. But the most chilling discovery came when Trooper Vance noticed something unusual about the cabin's interior dimensions. The structure appeared shorter inside than its exterior suggested, and a section of the floor near the back wall sounded hollow when walked upon. After pulling up several loose floorboards, investigators found a trap door leading to a basement space that appeared on no property survey or building record. A narrow wooden ladder descended into darkness, and the air rising from below carried the stale smell of kerosene and mildew. The basement consisted of a single room, approximately 10 feet by 12 feet, with walls of raw earth reinforced by timber supports. What they found inside that underground chamber would add a disturbing new dimension to the investigation. Against one wall stood a small cot with a thin mattress, a kerosene heater that still contained fuel, and a wooden crate serving as a makeshift table. But it was the walls themselves that captured the investigators' attention. Every available surface had been covered with newspaper clippings, carefully cut out and affixed with what appeared to be flour paste. The clippings documented missing persons cases across 3 states, dating back to 1955. Articles about vanished hikers, unsolved disappearances, search efforts that had found nothing. Someone had been collecting these stories for over 30 years, creating a grotesque archive of tragedy. Many of the articles showed signs of age, the newsprint yellowed and brittle, the edges crumbling when investigators attempted to remove them for evidence. But what made the discovery truly alarming was the handwriting in the margins. Someone had made notes on nearly every article, observations about search methods, speculation about what might have happened, criticism of law enforcement efforts. The annotations were written in 3 distinctly different hands. 2 of them matched the writing styles found in the journals upstairs, clearly belonging to Vernon and Dale Calloway. The 3rd set of notations was different, written in a younger, less practiced script, with occasional spelling errors that suggested someone still learning to write with confidence. These third-hand annotations appeared most frequently on articles from the late 1960s and throughout the 70s. Then, abruptly, they stopped. The last notation in the unfamiliar handwriting was dated August of 1981, scrawled beside an article about a missing hiker in the Ouachita Mountains. Too risky now. Increased patrols. Investigators realized they might be looking at evidence of an apprentice, someone who had learned from the Calloway brothers and possibly participated in their crimes. The timeline suggested this 3rd person had been active for over 15 years before disappearing from the record. The question became whether this individual had died, moved away, or simply continued the practices learned in that basement somewhere else. Forensic analysis of the handwriting by the FBI's Document Examination Unit confirmed that the 3rd writer was likely male, right-handed, and had been between 15 and 25 years old when the earliest annotations were made. The analysis also noted that the handwriting showed marked improvement over time, suggesting the writer had been quite young initially, possibly even a child. The search for this unknown 3rd person would become a priority, but with no name, no photograph, and only handwriting samples to work from, investigators faced a daunting challenge. They began interviewing everyone who had known the Calloway brothers, searching for any mention of a young relative, a hired hand, or a visitor who might have spent time at the remote cabin. The answer, when it finally emerged, would reveal that the brothers' crimes had corrupted more than just their own family line. While investigators pursued the mystery of the 3rd person, forensic accountants assigned to the case uncovered a financial trail that transformed their understanding of the Calloway brothers' operation. Despite having no documented employment, tax returns, or legitimate business records, Dale Calloway had been making regular cash deposits to a small bank in Springfield, Missouri, between 1977 and 1984. The deposits occurred every 3 to 4 months, always in cash, always in amounts between $1,500 and $4,000. Over 7 years, Dale had deposited $47,000 into an account opened under his legal name, Dale Hutchins. The bank's records showed that withdrawals from the account were minimal, suggesting the money had simply been accumulating. When investigators obtained security footage that the bank had archived on microfiche, they found something unexpected. A 1983 transaction showed Dale making a deposit while accompanied by a younger man, approximately 25 years old, wearing a denim jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. The younger man's face was partially visible in one frame, but the image quality made positive identification impossible. Still, investigators now had visual confirmation that someone had been working with the brothers. The source of Dale's income remained unclear until investigators discovered a collection of outdoor and hunting magazines in a storage shed behind the cabin. Several issues from the late 1970s and early 80s contained classified advertisements that had been circled in red ink. The ads offered private wilderness guide services and specialized tracking expeditions for serious sportsmen, with a post office box in Harrison, Arkansas, listed for contact. When investigators obtained a warrant for the post office box records, they found correspondence that revealed the true nature of the Calloway operation. Letters from men across the country inquired about the specialized services, often using coded language that barely disguised their true intentions. References to guaranteed exclusive experiences and controlled hunting scenarios appeared throughout the correspondence. Inside Vernon's bedroom, hidden beneath a false bottom in his dresser drawer, investigators discovered a leather-bound ledger that confirmed their worst suspicions. The ledger contained 17 names, complete addresses, and monetary amounts ranging from $2,500 to $8,000. The dates beside each entry spanned from 1979 to 1985. The brothers had not simply been hunting women themselves. They had been facilitating hunts for paying clients. 7 of the names in the ledger matched prominent businessmen and professionals from Little Rock, St. Louis, and Kansas City. One was a respected surgeon, another a real estate developer, a third a banking executive. When Arkansas State Police attempted to question these men, they encountered immediate legal resistance. 5 of the individuals had already left the country within days of the Calloway arrests becoming public. 2 had relocated to nations without extradition treaties with the United States. One name in the ledger belonged to Harold Pennington, a wealthy car dealership owner from Kansas City with no prior criminal record. On November 18, 1986, 2 weeks after the Calloway cabin discovery, FBI agents arrived at Pennington's home with a warrant. They found the house empty except for a note on the kitchen table. Pennington had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound in his garage hours earlier. Another name, Robert Ashford, a prominent attorney from Little Rock, died in what was officially ruled a single-car accident on November 23rd. His vehicle had left a rural highway and struck a tree at high speed. The accident occurred at 3 in the morning on a straight stretch of road with clear conditions. No mechanical failure was ever identified. The ledger suggested that the Calloway operation had been far more extensive and organized than anyone had initially imagined. Vernon and Dale Calloway were formally charged in February of 1987 with multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy. The trial began that May in the Newton County Courthouse, drawing national media attention and filling the courtroom beyond capacity every day for 6 weeks. The prosecution presented testimony from 43 witnesses, building a methodical case that connected the physical evidence from the cabin to specific disappearances documented across 2 decades. But the most compelling testimonies came from women who had survived encounters with the brothers, women whose reports had been dismissed or minimized by local authorities until the cabin's discovery validated their experiences. Rebecca Hartley took the stand on the 8th day of the trial. She described in careful detail how the brothers had tracked her through the wilderness, their patient pursuit, the calculated way they had searched for her hiding spots. Defense attorneys attempted to discredit her testimony by pointing out her initial false statement to police, but Rebecca's explanation was devastating in its simplicity. She had been afraid that telling the truth would make her a target, that the brothers had connections that would ensure she was never believed. Linda Shepard flew in from Oregon to testify. She described the October night in 1979 when she had hidden in a limestone cave while the brothers searched for her. How their calm voices discussing search patterns had terrified her more than anger or urgency would have. When prosecutors asked if she could identify the men, she pointed directly at Vernon and Dale without hesitation. The defense's cross-examination failed to shake her certainty. 3 other women testified about encounters that had seemed merely unsettling at the time, but took on sinister meaning after the arrests. A nurse from Fayetteville described meeting the brothers on a trail in 1982 and feeling uncomfortable enough with their questions about her hiking plans that she had turned back and left the area entirely. A college student from Missouri testified about being followed by 2 men matching their description in 1984, escaping only by hitchhiking a ride with a family she encountered at a trailhead. Most haunting was the testimony of Diane Kramer, who had hiked the Ozark Highlands Trail with her sister in August of 1983. The sisters had camped near Fairview Creek when 2 men approached their site after dark, claiming to be park rangers checking permits. Something about them had felt wrong, and the sisters had packed their gear in the darkness and hiked out by flashlight, abandoning their planned route. Diane's voice broke as she explained that she and her sister had laughed nervously about their paranoia during the drive home, embarrassed by their fearful reaction to what seemed like a harmless encounter. Now she understood. They had likely saved each other's lives. The physical evidence presented was overwhelming. Forensic analysis connected personal items found at the burial site to 5 of the missing women, whose families had provided dental records and identifying information. A turquoise ring recovered from the site matched exactly a photograph provided by the mother of Catherine Brennan, missing since 1981. A university identification card belonged to Jennifer Hayes, last seen in 1979. The journals recovered from the cabin were entered into evidence, though prosecutors read only selected excerpts in open court due to their disturbing content. The detailed documentation of stalking patterns, observations about victim behavior, and methodical planning demonstrated a level of calculation that contradicted any defense argument of opportunistic crime. Vernon sat expressionless throughout the proceedings, occasionally making notes on a legal pad, but never displaying emotion. Dale remained completely still, staring straight ahead, his face blank as witnesses described their terror. The jury deliberated for 7 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts for both brothers. Sentencing was scheduled for August, and as part of the pre-sentencing process, the court ordered psychiatric evaluations to assess whether the brothers understood the nature of their crimes and could be considered legally sane. Dr. Patricia Eisenberg, a forensic psychiatrist from the University of Arkansas Medical Center, spent 12 hours interviewing Vernon Calloway over 3 separate sessions. Her evaluation would become one of the most disturbing documents in the case file. Vernon, who had remained largely silent throughout the trial, spoke freely with Dr. Eisenberg, displaying what she described as complete emotional detachment from the gravity of his actions. Vernon told Dr. Eisenberg that the brothers had first encountered a lost hiker in late 1977, a young woman who had wandered off trail and stumbled onto their property seeking directions. Something about her vulnerability, her complete dependence on their help in that moment, had triggered what Vernon described as a realization. The isolated terrain, the infrequent patrols by park rangers, the tendency of authorities to assume hikers had simply gotten lost or fallen, all of these factors created what he called optimal conditions. He explained how they had initially been opportunistic, waiting for hikers to appear near their property. But over time, they had refined their approach, studying trail maps, learning seasonal patterns of foot traffic, identifying times when solo hikers were most likely to be on remote sections of trail. Weekdays during fall and early spring became their preferred hunting periods, when serious hikers sought solitude away from weekend crowds. Vernon described the evolution with disturbing clinical precision, as though discussing the development of a business model rather than serial murder. He detailed how they had learned to read body language, to identify which women would be easier to track, which might panic and make mistakes. He spoke about the importance of patience, of never rushing, of understanding that their familiarity with the terrain gave them an insurmountable advantage. When Dr. Eisenberg asked about the clients referenced in the ledger, Vernon initially seemed reluctant to discuss that aspect of their operation. Eventually, he acknowledged that Dale had developed the idea of offering their services to others after meeting someone at a hunting supply store in Springfield who had made an offhand comment about wanting a more challenging hunt than what conventional game offered. Dale had recognized a market, and the classified advertisements had followed. Dr. Eisenberg's report concluded that Vernon Calloway met all criteria for legal sanity, but displayed characteristics consistent with antisocial personality disorder and a complete lack of empathy. She noted that he showed no remorse, viewing his crimes as a logical response to available opportunities rather than moral failures. Dale Calloway refused to participate in any psychiatric evaluation. He maintained his complete silence, speaking only once during the entire post-trial process. When Judge Raymond Carlisle asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, Dale stood and said clearly, "I ain't sorry for nothing." Then he sat back down and never spoke again. With Vernon's confession providing additional evidence, prosecutors reopened their investigation into the full scope of the brothers' crimes. They returned to Rebecca Hartley with specific questions about what she had overheard during her 11 days of evasion. Rebecca revealed details she had been too frightened to share even with Detective Pruitt. During that terrifying moment when she had hidden beneath the fallen oak, she had heard Vernon mention something that had haunted her ever since. He had told Dale that they needed to be more careful now because the boy had gotten sloppy and nearly exposed them all. The comment suggested that the third person whose handwriting appeared in the basement had not simply been learning from the brothers, but had been actively participating in their hunts. With Vernon's confession on record and Rebecca's additional testimony about the boy, investigators intensified their search for the third person. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source in February of 1988, when a retired detective named Walter Boone contacted Arkansas State Police after reading about the case in a true crime magazine. Boone had worked for the Springfield Police Department in Missouri during the early 1960s. In March of 1963, A young woman named Patricia Hutchins had disappeared while hiking near Branson. She was 23 years old, a secretary at an insurance company, and had told her roommate she was taking a weekend camping trip to the Mark Twain National Forest. Her car was found at a trailhead, but Patricia herself was never seen again. During the investigation, Boone had interviewed Patricia's family, including her brother Raymond Hutchins Jr., who lived in a remote area outside of Branson. Raymond had been 26 at the time, unmarried, working occasionally as a hunting guide. Something about Raymond's demeanor during questioning had troubled Boone, an evasiveness in his answers, a lack of concern that seemed inappropriate for a brother whose sister had vanished. Boone had recommended further investigation, but his superiors had disagreed. There was no evidence connecting Raymond to his sister's disappearance, and the case was eventually classified as a probable accident. Raymond moved away from the area shortly after, and Boone had retired in 1972 without ever resolving his suspicions about the case. When Arkansas investigators showed Boone photographs of Vernon and Dale Calloway, the retired detective went silent. After a long moment, he explained that Vernon and Dale weren't the sons of Raymond Hutchins, the bootlegger. They were his younger brothers. Raymond Hutchins Jr. had two siblings who would have been teenagers in 1963. Vernon would have been 18, Dale 16. The pieces began falling into place with horrifying clarity. The brothers hadn't learned their methods through trial and error. They had learned from Raymond, who had disappeared in 1964 and was never located despite being wanted for questioning, in connection with two additional missing women cases in southern Missouri. Investigators obtained Raymond's military records, discovering he had served in Korea and received training in tracking and land navigation. After his discharge in 1957, he had worked sporadically as a hunting guide, developing an intimate knowledge of the Ozark wilderness. The blue pins on the map dating back to 1963 suddenly made sense. Raymond had been operating in those locations, and his younger brothers had been with him, learning. The name change from Hutchins to Calloway now carried new significance. Vernon and Dale hadn't been hiding from their father's bootlegging reputation. They had been distancing themselves from Raymond, whose disappearance in 1964 had made the Hutchins name too recognizable to law enforcement in the region. Archives from the Newton County Sheriff's Office revealed that Raymond Hutchins had been questioned briefly in 1964 about a missing hiker near Buffalo Point. He had provided an alibi and was released. 3 weeks later, he vanished. His truck was found abandoned near the Oklahoma border, but Raymond himself was never seen again. Whether he had fled to avoid prosecution, met with foul play, or simply disappeared into the wilderness remained unknown. But the most disturbing implication was this: if Raymond had trained his younger brothers starting in 1963, and if those brothers had then trained someone else, the legacy of violence stretched across 3 generations. The question of who the boy was became even more urgent, because whoever he was, he had been taught by men who had themselves been trained by a killer. Vernon Calloway died in the Arkansas Department of Corrections Maximum Security Unit in 1994. Prison records indicate he suffered a massive heart attack during the night and was found unresponsive during morning rounds. He was 69 years old and had served 7 years of multiple life sentences. Whatever additional secrets he possessed died with him. Dale outlived his brother by 9 years, remaining incarcerated until his death from liver cancer in 2003. During those 16 years behind bars, Dale Calloway never spoke another word to anyone. Guards, fellow inmates, prison psychologists all encountered the same absolute silence. He communicated through gestures when necessary, but refused to break his self-imposed vow of silence. Medical staff confirmed he was physically capable of speech, but he simply chose not to use it. The identity of the third person, whose handwriting appeared in the cabin's basement, was never conclusively established. Despite a nationwide search, enhanced analysis of the bank security footage, and interviews with over 200 individuals who had known the Calloway brothers, investigators could not determine who had spent time at that cabin, learning the methods that Vernon and Dale had inherited from their brother Raymond. The case was officially classified as solved with the convictions and deaths of the Calloway brothers, but an addendum remained open regarding potential accomplices. The FBI maintained an active file, periodically, reviewing any missing persons cases in remote areas that bore similarities to the Calloway pattern. Then, in October of 2001, 15 years after the cabin's discovery, 2 female hikers disappeared along the Ozark Highlands Trail. Jessica Brennan and Amy Whitfield, both 28 years old and experienced hikers from Memphis, had checked in at the Fairview Creek trailhead on a Tuesday morning. The trail register showed their entry dated October 9th, 2001. The handwriting was neat and cheerful, noting they planned to complete a 3-day circuit before returning to their vehicle. 3 weeks later, park rangers conducting a routine patrol found their backpacks arranged side by side on a flat rock formation approximately 6 miles from where they had last checked in. The backpacks were positioned with deliberate care, zippers aligned, shoulder straps laid out symmetrically. Between them sat a Polaroid camera, the same discontinued model that had been found in the Calloway cabin 15 years earlier. The camera contained no film. Forensic examination found no fingerprints, no DNA, no trace evidence beyond the expected environmental contamination. Jessica and Amy were never found, despite the most extensive search operation in Arkansas park history. Over 400 volunteers combed the area for weeks. Cadaver dogs found nothing. Aerial surveys revealed no signs of the missing women. Arkansas State Police noted certain details that troubled them deeply. The disappearance occurred on a Tuesday during October, precisely matching the pattern Vernon had described to Dr. Eisenberg as optimal hunting conditions. The location was remote, with minimal foot traffic during weekdays in fall. The symbolic placement of the camera seemed designed to send a message to investigators who would understand its significance. The case remains open. Somewhere, the third person may still exist, carrying forward methods learned in that basement room decades ago. The Ozark wilderness, vast and unforgiving, keeps its secrets well. And every year, hundreds of hikers traverse those same remote trails, most never knowing the history beneath their feet, or the possibility that somewhere in those endless forests, someone might still be watching. If this story has affected you, if you believe these cases deserve to be remembered and investigated thoroughly, then click the like button and subscribe to our channel. Every subscription helps us continue researching and sharing these important true crime stories that might otherwise be forgotten. The victims deserve to be remembered, and the truth, no matter how disturbing, deserves to be told. Thank you for listening, and stay safe out there.